2017. I'm looking forward to speaking with our next guest. She's originally from Dublin. You'll know her if you are somebody who watches the news. If you pay attention to political affairs here in the UK, you'll know all about her. She recently formed and heads up the ForBritain party. That's after she stood for the leadership of the UK Independence Party. After that, as I said, she formed ForBritain. It's been described as a far-right party. She's also a director of Sharia Watch UK. And as I said, you'll often see her across UK media, television and radio talking about issues. She's often asked to comment on radical Islam here in the UK. Delighted that she's agreed to come on the programme tonight. Let's welcome to the show Anne-Marie Waters. Anne-Marie, welcome. How are you?
I'm well. How are you?
Sure, I'm not too bad at all, thanks. Thanks for agreeing to come on. Do you recognise these labels, or are you sick of these labels? You know, whenever your name is mentioned, far-right extremist, what do you think? Are you tired of it?
Oh, it doesn't bother me anymore. You know, people see through it. It's like racists. You know, racist no longer has any power anymore. People can see through it. It is tedious, of course, and it is tedious that you have to keep answering over and over again that this is about religion, that my objection to immigration from certain parts of the world is not because of the race of those people, it's because of the religion of those people. I don't believe it's compatible with Western society. I think we've proven it isn't compatible. It's not as if we have no evidence to go on. We have enormous problems already inside European countries because of Muslim immigration, and we don't want those problems, and they are horrific problems like FGM and child marriage, and you know, we're not talking about minor issues here. And that's our concern, and that's my concern. And, you know, the real extremists, of course, are the people who want to bring down borders and destroy and ignore thousands of years of cultural development, which is different in different parts of the world. That's an extreme position, to want to just bring down borders and melt us all together and expect it all to go okay. It won't. This is my position, is the common sense one. It's the open borders position that's the extreme one.
We'll talk about that shortly, and I'm really keen to talk about free speech as well, because it's a massive attack on freedom of speech in this country and elsewhere. I'm really interested in talking about that. Before that, though, like yourself, I was very much in favour of the UK leaving the European Union. Like yourself, Anne-Marie, I was very much in favour of Ireland rejecting the Nice Treaty and, you know, saying no to the European Union. I was listening to Nigel Farage on the Andrew Marr show yesterday, and Farage said increasingly he's beginning to feel like this is not going to happen, and what we might end up with is some sort of Mickey Mouse lukewarm Brexit, which isn't really leaving, but some sort of associate membership, which kind of would be, you know, an affront to the referendum result last year. Do you think we're going to leave the European Union?
I think that it's been dragged out in the way that it is, so that they can get a second referendum. And I think it's going to be dragged out probably, quite possibly, indefinitely. They want a second referendum. It's wanted by the EU and it's wanted by a lot of people here in the UK. And I think that's the intention. If we ever do get out, yeah, I think it'll be in name only. If even that, I'm very pessimistic about Brexit and about it actually happening. And like I said, we need to the customs union, the whole thing has to go. We can't be tied to it at all. We have to be completely sovereign and free. And I'm not optimistic about it. I think that there may well be a second referendum. And I think there could be real trouble after that.
May looks to be under, you know, increasing pressure from so many different angles. Domestically, problems within her own party. The election manifesto she ran on was bizarre, to say the least. And I've actually had MPs on the programme, former MPs, who said they cannot believe that manifesto. It was almost like somebody wanted to derail that party and cause problems for her. So we're looking at a scenario, Anne-Marie, where maybe over this dispute with the European Union over the border in Northern Ireland, that maybe the DUP might pull the confidence and supply arrangement. That would, of course, bring the government down. And then you've got the flip-flopper himself, Jeremy Corbyn, next year to come in some sort of rainbow coalition and then we'll be hearing all about the second referendum. This is a possibility, right?
Absolutely, and one of the priorities is to keep Labour out, and May is simply not showing the required leadership that she needs to. She is in a mess. The last general election was a disaster for Theresa May, but she needed to stand up. She needed to really be counted. She needed to really show a backbone with the DUP, with the European Union, with her own party. She really needed to show some backbone and prioritise the result of the referendum. And I don't see that from her. She's simply not a strong enough leader. I mean, the EU is a bully. The EU is a bully. And what's needed for bullies is to stand up to them. The UK has a lot of power and a lot of strength. And May is behaving. She's essentially going to them with a begging bowl. It's complete. The weakness of Theresa May is a terrible thing. But at the same time, I don't see who can replace her. It's a disaster. And the big disaster is that we could well be looking at, if May's government does collapse, we could well be looking at a Corbyn government. I can think of little worse.
Well, tragically, I mean, I don't identify, as a supporter of any political party, Anne-Marie, but tragically, I agree with you, despite the fact that for 30 odd years, Corbyn was a great critic of the European Union and what it had done to wages, to working conditions in this country, what it had done to the fisheries and everything else. Tragically, I absolutely agree with you. Listeners are tweeting us, of course, and I'm getting emails as well. It strikes me as very interesting that we've heard people, very successful businessmen and women, among them Sir James Dyson, who said this whole negotiation thing is pretty much a nonsense. We should just leave. Why would you want 2 years? Just walk away from it. I wonder why it was never mooted, Anne-Marie. That rather than send David Davis over to Brussels, who he might be a nice guy, he might mean well, why didn't we send a hard-nosed businessman or woman into these negotiations? Why didn't we do that?
Lack of strength. Again, lack of leadership, lack of strength. We're behaving like we have no power here. Just walk away from the thing. If you put in Parliament a European Communities Act repeal bill and repeal the European Communities Act, it puts the UK in the driving seat. We can then start acting as a sovereign state rather than almost on the naughty step in this club we don't want to be in. And begging for scraps. Repeal the European Communities Act and walk out and take control. There is no strength whatsoever. These negotiations are a farce. And as I said, they want the public to think this is an incredible, it's all so complex and it's so difficult. No, it's not. Countries trade with each other all the time. All they have to do is give tariff-free trade, which is in the best interest of everybody, every country in the EU and in the UK, and then stay out of it and let businesses trade with each other. That's all that needs to happen. But they want it to look complicated and they want to drag it on and on and on. And I believe that the aim of much of the establishment, both in the UK and in the EU, is that second referendum, which they want to win.
I absolutely agree with you on that. Finally, on Europe for the moment, and then we want to talk about Islam and freedom of speech and that. The Joseph Rowntree Foundation said today that 20% of the people in this country are living in poverty. Now, I'm not surprised by that. I'm not. There's a great irony, isn't there? Because while this was given some coverage in the media today, the Remainers, people like Tony Blair, I have no hesitation of calling him a warmongering murderer who should be in prison for the rest of his life, saying that, Vince Cable and others saying that when we leave it's going to be absolutely catastrophic. Nobody's making the connection today that the reason why 20% of the people of this country are living in poverty, well, one of the great reasons anyway, Anne-Marie, is because of the UK's membership of the European Union.
Absolutely. And of course, the big I word, immigration. We cannot sustain this. Are we going to hand over £44 billion to the European Union now, while 20% of our own people are living in poverty, while people in full-time employment are using food banks? We're throwing away money, wasting it across the public sector, wasting it on foreign aid, and handing over who knows how much to the European Union. Can we get a bit of common sense here and start putting some money into Britain and to helping the British people and to expanding the British economy and getting British people into work and taking people off this dependency they have on the welfare state? We have big problems here at home, and that's where that money is needed, not 44 billion to the corrupt EU or countless amounts sent off for foreign aid. We have real problems here. We have real poverty here, and we start directing our resources at that for a change.
I had an email today after I said you were coming on, and I knew I would, and it's great. I mean, the wonderful thing about speaking with you is, it's just ignoring what we call mainstream media, who won't do an in-depth interview with anybody to find out what anybody really thinks or to understand where they're coming from, right? That's what we're doing here. I mean, that's what we do, and we don't go along with this progressive madness of name-calling people and virtue signalling. It's a nonsense, Anne-Marie, and it isn't journalism. A friend of mine got in touch with me today. He's from Rochdale. He's a Pakistani, third-generation UK citizen. He said, Richie, interesting you have Anne-Marie on. He said, I would have sympathy with some of what Anne-Marie and others say, but why don't they acknowledge more than they do that there are a lot, in fact, the majority of British Muslim men and women are living in the country, they're working in the country, they're going home, they're going to bed, they're getting up the following day, they are living and they are compatible with British society. They're going to the mosque on a Friday and the rest of the week they're just getting on with their jobs. Well, there might be a problem, and I think there is a problem personally, I do. But my friend says there might be a problem. Why don't groups like, ForBritain acknowledge that a great deal of Muslim people have been living here for generations and getting on?
Well, look, first of all, I constantly make the distinction between Islam and Muslims. Constantly. It's Islam I have a problem with. Now, it doesn't mean that all Muslims get off the hook with that, because if Islam as an ideology wouldn't actually cause any problems if Muslims weren't putting it into practice. I've never said every Muslim is a problem. I'm saying the religion is a problem, and we have enormous problems specific to that religion. For example, the vast majority of FGM cases in this country involve Muslims. The vast majority of honour violence involves Muslims. The vast majority of the rape gangs are involving Muslims. There's a problem here. And as for, people ask me, why don't you campaign about this and why don't you campaign about that? Well, look, I'm only one person and there's only 24 hours in a day, and we can only campaign about certain things.
Yeah.
I campaign about this, because it concerns me deeply for many reasons. As a woman, it concerns me deeply. As a gay woman, it concerns me deeply. As someone who believes very strongly in democracy and in freedom, it concerns me deeply. But also because it's being ignored. And you know how big a problem this is when the politicians consistently and across the board ignore it. They ignore it because they're not up to the job, and all they do is come out with meaningless sound bites to kick the can down the road and not have to deal with anything. There is a problem with Islam. I didn't say every Muslim was incompatible or unable to live in the UK, but Islam, as it is written in its scriptures, is wholly incompatible, as, by the way, described by the European Court of Human Rights, something that judges rarely refer to, even though they refer to it to keep rapists and terrorists in the country. But it is wholly incompatible with a free society, with freedom of speech, and where men and women have the same rights, for example. Wholly incompatible. And I will continue to say so.
Yeah, I mean, there are interpretations, and I have some concerns as well. The Rochdale story, the Rotherham story, why it wasn't picked up. News recently about school books and things that were being said in some Islamic faith schools. I agree with you, I'd have serious problems with that. But I do, and listen, Anne-Marie, when I tell you I'm no virtue signaller and I'm no progressive, I absolutely mean it. I couldn't be any less of those things. But I feel sorry for Muslims sometimes. I mean, we had this thing in Manchester. How dare I call it a thing? 22 people were murdered by a madman, and his name was Salman Abedi. But you know what pisses me off, Anne-Marie, excuse the language, is that his imam was telling the local police here what was going on. His imam was telling the local police that this guy was going down a bad road. And listen, I'm not laying this at your feet, by the way. I accept what you said. because I've been listening to you and watching you for long enough to know that you're not going out there saying it's all Muslims. I know you're not saying that, so I'm not laying it at your feet. But I just feel sorry for them, because they're like, well, hang on a second, we're citizens, we're doing our thing. What can we do when a madman goes and does that? Particularly when we told the police. And you know, some Muslims have contacted this programme, Anne-Marie, and they've asked some very good questions, namely, how did this guy get into the country? How was it that he was off in Syria and he was in Turkey and the French warned us about him? All these questions we should be asking before we start talking about, you know, Wahhabism and Salafism and all of that. So I kind of feel a bit sorry for them. Go ahead.
Well, look, once again, I never have blamed all Muslims. I'm not suggesting, and I've never suggested there aren't decent Muslims. Of course, do you think I've never known any decent Muslims? Of course I do. But look, it's unfortunate that Muslims feel this way, but it's not a priority to me. You know, my priority is that people are being blown up, and if you know, the moderate Muslims really want to help, they can admit and start owning up to the fact that these horrible things are written in the Quran. I don't hear that. It's not about blaming all Muslims. It's about discussing what's written in these scriptures. And Muslims should have the honesty and decency to join us in doing that. Instead, for the most part, what we get is people like me called fascists and racists.
Yeah.
And I don't know anything about Islam. I do know about Islam. I have read the Quran. I know the Hadith. You know, it's time for Muslims to own up and to fess up and to own the fact that this stuff is a completely valid interpretation, a literal interpretation of the Quran, and it's time they owned up to that.
Let me come back in on that, Anne-Marie, because it's an ancient text, and most Muslims, they take out of it what people take out of the Torah and the Bible: love your neighbour, look after one another. What about if a Muslim? Let me just finish this quick question. You come straight back in then. What if a Muslim man was listening to this and he said, well, Anne-Marie's from Dublin, Richie's from Waterford. Imagine you were asked to disown the IRA. Now, it doesn't matter whether what the IRA were doing came from the Bible or not, but they were blowing people up in pubs in this country. What if you were told that you should be out there condemning that when you had nothing to do with it? That's a fair question.
First of all, I would condemn it. If people ask me to condemn a bombing, I'm going to condemn it.
Yeah, but you shouldn't be forced to condemn it, though.
No, who's being forced to condemn it? It's a perfectly legitimate thing. If I'm asked to condemn a bombing, I will condemn it. I condemn bombings. But look, to compare this with the IRA is absurd. It's absurd. The IRA were a political left-wing terror group with a political aim. What we are dealing with now is a global religious war being waged against us. It is a war that comes from a perfectly legitimate literal reading of the Quran. It is an entirely different situation. And if you're asking me if people blamed me for the IRA, then yes, I'd be upset. But I'm not blaming Muslims for Islamic terrorism. I'm blaming Islam and the terrorists. But if someone asked me to condemn a bombing, of course I'll condemn it. Of course I'll condemn it. And I'll condemn the IRA unequivocally.
Yeah, I think they would say the expectation that you should condemn it because you're Irish. You know, I would condemn it like you, but I wouldn't. You know, I wouldn't allow, you know, the expectation that I should condemn it because it had nothing to do with you and it had nothing to do with me. On these...
Let me speak.
Go on.
I understand what you're saying and I take your point and it's a valid one. But in the grand scheme of things, it's not really what I am worried about. I am far more concerned about the blowing people up in the first.
Well, so am I. So let's move on to that. By the way, let me just do a quick recap. Anne-Marie, many of your followers listening in tonight, Anne-Marie Waters is live on the line to us. I don't know where Anne-Marie is actually. It's none of my business where she is, but I ordinarily say where our guests are. Maybe you're in London, Anne-Marie?
No.
You're not in London.
In England.
You're in England somewhere. She's somewhere in England. Anne-Marie Waters, originally from Dublin, stood for the UKIP leadership, of course, has formed the ForBritain party, a new political party, as usual, as you'd expect with Anne-Marie and others. The progressive press label her fascist, racist and all the rest of it. I don't believe she's fascist or racist. And I believe that there's an agenda to describe people as fascist and racist because that ultimately prevents discourse and discussion about these issues, rational discussion. Anne-Marie, we've had... I don't want to get into the whole history of Wahhabism and the British Empire in the Middle East going back over the years. But we talk to a lot of people on this programme and they're not conspiracy theorists. They're former MI5, former CIA people. and they will say that Anne-Marie Waters is quite right to worry about some of the things that young men, young Muslim men in this country are doing. They would say she's absolutely right to be thinking about that, and we should be talking about it, and she shouldn't be called a fascist. However, we've got to go to the source of it. Why do we have this? Why is this happening? And to them, this goes back to the intelligence agencies of our countries funding, training and arming these nutters to bring about regime change in certain countries in the Middle East. That, of course, Anne-Marie, as you well know, often results in the deaths of millions of people and the displacement of millions more. And through that migrant flow, then, you get some of these lunatics that you've been describing. Some of our, I could name these people, you know, former Assistant Treasury Secretary Paul Roberts, Ray McGovern, the most decorated CIA man that ever lived. All these people saying our intelligence agencies have given these guys oxygen and given them life. What do you say to that?
Look, this is called life. You know, geopolitics continues and has always happened. We have the games that the West have played across the years in the Middle East. If you think I think that the West is a saint, think again. I don't. But look, nothing the West can do will make Saudi Arabia chop off the heads of its blasphemers. That's their fault. And it gets, you know, to me, I get very weary of this. Everything is somehow the West's fault. Everything that happens in the world is somehow because of some move we've made. You know, other people are responsible for themselves. The other people are responsible for how they react to things. And you know why this jihadism has been going on for 1400 years. You know, some people will blame it on the United States. Jihadis were attacking the United States years, only decades after the United States was formed.
But they weren't here, though. They've not been here. This is the thing, you see. They've not been here, Anne-Marie.
You're looking for the base of it. As I said, global politics will take place. The West is no saint, but it's not the only one to cause problems either, and it's not the only one responsible for things. Look, nothing, again, I repeat it, nothing the West can do causes Saudi Arabia and Iran to impose these medieval, grotesque, brutal, religion-based punishments, and these jihadis are driven by religious fervour.
But these are, hang on a second, let me jump in, Anne-Marie, let me jump back in. These...
But you're not letting me finish.
I am letting you finish, and you'll get loads of time. No, I've got to interject there because you're talking about domestic problems with human rights issues in Saudi Arabia and Iran, and I would absolutely agree with you. But we're talking about the destruction of countries. Yeah, but hang on, we're talking about the destruction of countries like Iraq and Syria and Libya. The willful and wanton destruction of those countries by Western imperialism, which has resulted in that migrant flow into Europe directly, right?
No, that's a matter of opinion.
Anne-Marie, it's a matter of fact.
Well, look, when the West intervenes, it's wrong. When it doesn't intervene, it's wrong. My point is that there is a religious war. The religion is what's driving jihadism. Western actions are definitely recruiting mechanisms, but the religion is what drives it. It is not the West's fault. Jihad is not the West's fault.
Let me just talk about the migrant issue, because you've talked a lot about and I would agree with it, the frankly insane decision by Germany to allow, at the behest of, you know, international financiers, George Soros and others, to allow 1 million migrants into Germany. It's absolutely insane.
Plus, 1 million plus.
1 million plus. But those migrants, Anne-Marie, would not exist if our intelligence agencies, that's the US, the UK and Israel, were not funding jihadists in Syria. It wouldn't be happening.
We have people arrested for rape from Gambia, from Eritrea, from every African country you can think of. Give me a break. These are not refugees and asylum seekers. Very few of them, I would imagine. A small percentage are. This is opportunism. Half the Middle East and Africa made its way. People from half the countries in the Middle East and Africa made their way to Germany. It's absurd to suggest we created that. It's a largely economic, people looking for an economic, better life. That's absurd to suggest that we have created this. So Merkel opened the door, and a hell of a lot of people came.
And hundreds of thousands of those in Germany now are from Syria. Hundreds of thousands from Syria and places like Libya. Now, with what's happening in Yemen, we're going to see a mass exodus from Yemen. The point I'm making is that wouldn't be happening if our governments weren't intervening in those countries. We wouldn't have that problem. And I'm agreeing with you that within...
I think we should be staying out of them altogether. I'm completely against intervention unless it's for our own to prevent a direct threat to us. I don't want us intervening in these countries. I think we should be staying out of them altogether.
So why are we then? Why do you think that is? Why do we have millions of migrants leaving countries that, even if you and I didn't like the government they had, those countries were stable? Now those countries are in ruins and millions of people have left those countries. And by the way, I agree with you. Within that migrant flow will be lunatics, Anne-Marie, and they will seek to do things in this country.
Have to be lunatics. It's people why do Europeans matter so little in this? Why are we expected to sit back and watch this absolute transformation of our countries? Why are we so unimportant in all of this? And it's true.
I don't disagree with this, by the way. I don't disagree with this. I just want to try and nail down who's responsible for it.
Several people are responsible, including us. But if you think I think that it would be my policy to intervene in these countries, it wouldn't be.
Yeah.
It's several people's fault, but that's neither. The fact remains that innocent European people are having our countries transformed in front of our eyes. If we dare to object, we are called fascists and racists and Nazis.
Which is outrageous.
That's what my concern is.
Which is outrageous. And listen, I wouldn't tolerate it. Somebody being called fascist and racist because they have questions about these issues. I can't abide by it. I've worked at every level of the media, Anne-Marie. The reason I do an independent programme today is because I can't bear what's happened to the media, because we don't have discourse. We don't have arguments with people. We have progressives like Owen Jones, and we have progressives like various people writing for The Guardian and The Independent, working as talking heads, seeking to shut down discussion and to label people as fascist and racist. I don't believe it. Who would benefit? I don't mean individual names. Forget names. Who stands to benefit if cultures are diluted to the extent that they are being diluted, and if majority cultures are losing out to minority cultures? Who does that benefit in the long run?
Well, of course it benefits the elite, the political and financial elite. Look, we're seeing the EU is essentially some weird hybrid of corporatism and socialism. Look, there's a transformation of society so that people are simply units, working units, not citizens. Governance will be unaccountable, and it is already unaccountable because we can't remove the chiefs at the top of the EU. And to the mass immigration to dilute our cultures is to disempower us. Culture and nation is a great unifier, gives people pride, gives people strength, gives people a sense of something to fight for. All of this has been taken away from us to weaken us and turn us into units, working units, to keep them in power. And of course the big companies love it because they're getting to import cheap labour from all over the world. The rich, as usual, are the ones who will benefit. Who else? And
of course it's their policies being carried out by the various governments that they've placed in charge of our countries, not just this country, but Ireland and the rest of them. We've got about 5-6 minutes left on this. It's great to have Anne-Marie on the programme. I will tweet out a link to ForBritain. Anne-Marie's Twitter, by the way, if you're not following her and you do want to follow her, it's at AMD Waters. That's at AMD, that's Alpha Mother Delta Waters, AMD Waters. Follow her there, and it's ForBritain.uk, recently formed political party. Loads of interest in this, typically enough. It's coming down kind of on both sides, people saying that they feel that Anne-Marie is blaming Islam for everything. I'm not sure that she is, to be fair, and we've disagreed on that anyway. I've put all the counterpoints to Anne-Marie. A lot of people saying Richie is blind. Follower of Anne-Marie's called Craig is saying Richie is blind. I'm fed up with these radio presenters apologising for radical Islam. I'm not, Craig. I'm not apologising for it all. I accept that there's an issue and it must be dealt with. I'm interested in why there is an issue, how these people are getting in, who's behind it, and if there's any chance that we can work with everybody to deal with it. And that means, Muslims, Sikhs, Catholics, Jews, it doesn't bloody matter who. Keep those tweets coming in even to at Richie Allen Show. Tell me this, Anne-Marie. We've talked a lot about this recently. Free speech. Now, of course, we had the big thing last week. Donald Trump tweeted some stuff that had been put out there by Britain First. There was a massive furore, of course. Staggers me to see how many progressives they can put on a television programme in the afternoon to condemn and to demand that people be banned. I've always believed, Anne-Marie. No, I'm not going to lie. I'm going to tell the truth. I used to be one of these idiots. Some years ago, before I educated myself, I used to be one of these idiots. Finding racism and prejudice everywhere. Not anymore. But it's ludicrous to me, the idea that just because somebody says something you disagree with them, that A, you would deplatform them, B, you would ban them, C, you would label them some, horrible name, call them some horrible name, and D, they can't come to our country. I don't think this is funny anymore. I think it's very serious. It's devastating to free speech. What do you think?
Free speech is on its last legs at every level. Universities are particularly frightening. But politics, you're not allowed to have a view on especially immigration and Islam. These are the big two. If you have anything except praise, you're in trouble. You're going to be shunned, and you're going to be labelled, and you're going to be attacked. We must be able to speak freely about everything, and there can't be a price to pay. People will say to me, "But you're saying it now. What do you mean you're not allowed to say it?" Look, I've lost my career over this. I'll never. I'm supposed to be a lawyer. I'll never be a lawyer because of this. People write to me all the time saying they risk their jobs if they turn out to events and things. This is not freedom. Even if you're legally and technically able to say it, if you're risking losing your job, this is not freedom to speak. And we're living in a country dominated by bullies, by leftist bullies who have control of the media and have control of the public sector, the two most important things for control in a society. And they have control of all of it. And they will relentlessly bully individuals who dare to raise a question, even a question. And an example that I'd give, if you're in a boardroom at an NHS governing meeting or whatever it may be, and they're talking about how they're going to spend £1 million or so on transgender champion GPs.
Yeah.
If you're the person in the room will put your hand up and says, "Hold on a minute, this is ridiculous," you are in trouble.
Oh, you're a bigot. You're a bigot. You're a bigot.
There doesn't have to be a law saying you're not allowed to say this in order for a society to be living in fear of speaking their minds. And when a society is in fear of speaking its mind, it's not a free society. It's a very dangerous one. And democracy, of course, is its first and most important victim. And it's happening. It's happening.
There's a policy on ForBritain.uk, and I was glad to see it. I'm going to read out the policy line. ForBritain believes in freedom of thought and the rights of the individual to assent to or reject any philosophical, political or religious belief system without penalty. Does that go for Zionism? Because we've covered cases in recent months and even going back last year where academics, where politicians and others have been deplatformed, have been thrown out of universities because they object to whether they're right or wrong doesn't matter as far as I'm concerned. They object to the Israeli government's policy in Gaza. And we've seen charities like the Campaign Against Anti-Semitism seek to label people as racist and bigoted because they have serious problems with the behaviour of Israel. Again, whether they're right or wrong doesn't matter. Does that include Zionism? If people want to reject Zionism, because you often get accused, and you know this, you and others, Anne-Marie and others, really, they're just Zionists. They're hiding behind the fact that they're Zionists. Should people be allowed to criticise Zionism if they want?
Of course. I'm surprised to be even asked that. Of course people can criticise Zionism. Of course people can criticise Israel. We can criticise whatever we like. That's the whole idea. But I have to say, I'm seeing quite a lot of no platforming anyone who speaks in support of Israel. I'm seeing that quite frequently.
Really?
So absolutely. So that's definitely coming from both sides, I can assure you.
I wouldn't tolerate that either. Yeah.
I mean, come on, tinfoil hat time. It really is. I support Israel. Not unconditionally. I like the West. I love the West, but I know that sometimes the West does things wrong. Same with Israel, but I do support Israel. I support it because it's a place of safety for a vulnerable religious group. And now that we're seeing this mass immigration from the Muslim world into Europe, indeed, it's proving that it's been needed again. 10,000 Jews left France for Israel in 2015 alone, and largely because they no longer feel safe there. And you're seeing that repeated in countries across Europe, including Germany and the UK.
And yet there's no, I mean, we speak to Jewish groups in this country, and there's no real evidence of any growth in anti-Semitism at all. I mean, we've challenged the campaign against anti-Semitism, which is a ludicrous charity, which spends its time labelling people as anti-Semitic and Holocaust deniers when they're not. And by the way, I agree with you. If I was given the chance to wave a wand in the morning, we'd have a pre-1967 border two-state solution. That's what I would do. But when we want to talk about Zionist influence in UK politics and in American politics, and we want to explore that, and we want to talk about what Israel does and, you know, how Mossad operates in countries, we should be able to do that, as you and I are talking now, without being labelled as hateful or anti-Semitic. I wasn't, you know, I expected you to give the answer you gave. I didn't think that you wouldn't, but you understand it's an open platform. Listeners have tweeted it. You know, I know Tommy Robinson gets accused all the time. He's worn Mossad t-shirts on interviews, which has wound people up. I couldn't care less what he wears in interviews, but I said I'd put the question to you. But generally, freedom of speech, you reckon, honest last legs, we're going to... I mean, it's a thought police situation we're having here, Anne-Marie, isn't it? We're having people destroyed across, you know, academia and elsewhere because they have opinions that have been deemed as abhorrent or unacceptable by this kind of progressive multiculturalist kind of agenda. How do we deal with that? Final question. How do you overcome that?
How do we restore freedom of speech?
Yeah, how do you do it? Yeah.
With a magic wand. No, look, a lot of it comes from the politicians and from leaders. We've had several examples now where they had an opportunity to stand up for freedom of speech, going all the way back to the Rushdie affair, which was a prime example of an opportunity they had to stand up for freedom of speech, and they didn't. But largely because they're afraid of votes. If they set certain religious groups are afraid of losing votes. But look, restoring freedom of speech, we need to change the laws and get rid of all this hate crime nonsense. You mentioned police state. You know, it's literally a police state. They're telling us on Twitter that they'll find people who use nasty words or who use threatening, or this is the police are on Twitter telling people that they will, if you say nasty things on social media, they'll track you down. Meanwhile, there's a girl being gang raped down the road and no one gives a damn. We've got to get rid of this hate nonsense, restore equal citizenship, and that no one is a greater victim because of their skin color or anything else than another person. This is absolutely key. Getting rid of this hate crime nonsense is key. And getting the police to do some policing again. How we do that is fire several police commanders and send out a very strong message that you will start enforcing the law. We'll repeal hate speech legislation, which is what it is, and we'll make the police do their job again. This is key. It's just a starting point, but we also need politicians who acknowledge, who even understand. I'm not sure many of them even understand the importance of freedom of speech. Don't always assume politicians are the sharpest knives in the drawer. I don't think a lot of them even understand it, and they'll do and say anything they think will get them votes. So freedom of speech is absolutely key, and we need responsible leaders willing to stand up for it, get rid of this hate crime nonsense, and make the police get off Twitter and stop analysing people's social media accounts and get out there and start arresting criminals. This is a starting point.
Brilliant, yeah. They're using artificial intelligence going forward, which is crazy. To find out more about ForBritain and the policies of the party, go to forbritain.uk. I enjoyed chatting with you, Anne-Marie. Thanks for giving us your time. I really appreciate it, and I hope you'll come back on again in the future.
Thanks a lot.
Cheers.
We will make America great again.